It's my honor and privilege to welcome a special guest, somebody who's been a friend for more than 2 decades to BW Dialogue today. We're talking to him because not only is he omnipresent on all TV debates across the day and especially in the evening, but most importantly, he's just written a book called The Great Unraveling, India After 2040. Let me welcome Mr. Sanjay Jha, who's been an entrepreneur, who's been the national spokesperson of the Congress Party. This is his 3rd book, now an author. Welcome, Sanjay, to the BW Dialogue. This is the book we're going to talk about today. So go and pick it up. It is very simple, lucidly written. There's 6 chapters. So let me start by asking Sanjay, how have been the last 9 months for you, both personally and professionally?
Well, Anurag, first and foremost, thank you very much for inviting me for the BW Dialogues. I'm also, very grateful to everyone who's logged in this afternoon at 4 o'clock to be part of this entire program. You asked me, how has this year been? Well, we got another week to go before the year literally wraps up. But yeah, this has been a very crazy year for probably everyone. I remember all of us starting Jan 1, 2020, with all kinds of crazy expectations. Everybody was talking about their personal milestones and resolutions. And then you had this diabolical pathogen that completely upturned our lives. And I think all of us should be grateful when we look back that we're in good health, our families are, safe. And at the end of the day, we all managed to, shall we say, cruise and overall overcome what appeared in the early stages of the pandemic as a fairly tough and insurmountable battle. I, by the way, got COVID in the month of May, and I was infected. I was amongst the first few people who actually got infected in the sphere of politics. And I went public with it because I was appalled to see the kind of stigma that was being attached to the disease. And, it was important to send out a message that we are all vulnerable. Everybody is susceptible to this awful infection. But if you have the resilience, you'll overcome it for sure. And so when I look back at the year, I have followed one thumb rule that has been my passion all my life. If life gives you a lemon, make a lemonade. So I got suspended by the Congress. It was a traumatic year politically for the party. And, it was strange because I had been fighting for the party, literally, as you said in the introduction, night in and day out. That too on a very public format like television screens, which is never easy. It might appear very attractive and glamorous on the face of it, but trust me, it's a very, very tough job. So when I was suddenly summarily sacked, I was, I can't deny, momentarily stunned, although I did believe that I had raised issues that given the Congress party, there would be some backlash. But the fact that there was no conversation with me and I suddenly discovered on the NDTV channel at 10 o'clock in the night that I had been suspended, that to me was like pretty much a wow moment. And I then think I'm glad I went on and did my book. I've got fantastic publishers in Westland. And I'm very delighted to share with you, Anurag, and with your viewers that in a very short period of time, it occupied the #1 spot as a bestseller on the political non-fiction side. So yeah, I'm feeling good about it.
Good, Sanjay. You're right. I keep saying, whenever it rains, look for rainbows. Whenever it's dark, look for the stars. So clearly you look for the rainbows and the stars and you kept yourself active. I remember interacting with you during COVID times. I texted you once I saw your update on Facebook. You're my Facebook friend. So I did engage with you then. Now let me jump into the book directly.
Sure.
This book is called The Great Unraveling, India After 2014. Give us a sense of how did the idea of the book come to you? And there are 6 chapters in the book. Which one is your most favorite chapter?
Well, there are 6 chapters, starting with Hindutva, the decline of institutions, the success of Mr. Modi, the state of the economy, despite demonetization and GST being terribly executed, the role of media and the Congress. But don't forget that I think there's a lot of punch in the prologue and epilogue where I've actually written a very substantive core parts of the book. So effectively, the book has 8 chapters and an introduction. Hard for me as a writer, you kind of get very dispassionate over your writing. You're fairly neutral. You believe you have punched the buttons in each and every part of your book. But from the initial feedback that I'm getting, I think a lot of people are liking the chapters on the Congress and the media in particular, because they find that these are, there's a lot of anecdote. It's basically a lot of storytelling based on my experience with a lot of politicians within my own party. And of course, my favorite obsession in the early part of my spokesperson's role, which was Arnab Goswami. Arnab and I were like literally breathing down each other's necks in his studio for literally years. So yeah, it was fun. And, I do believe that the book was a result of just one thing, that I began to get worried, not just as a Congress spokesperson, but more as a regular, citizen of this country. Yeah, that, end of day in India, there are elections and one political party wins and somebody loses. But Indian democracy, our constitution, secularism, tolerance, the whole culture of an inclusive society that we live in, that should never come under any kind of threat. Just because the BJP wins 2 big elections with a humongous majority does not mean that they are bigger than the country. A government is a government. But if you and I tomorrow criticize the government and somebody from the political party comes and says you're anti-national, I think that's bizarre, it's ridiculous, it's absurd. And which is why I believe, Anurag, I'm sure we're going to ask this later on, why this farmers' protest is now ballooned into a global issue for Mr. Modi's government? Because how can you call your own farmers, no matter what your politicians believe, you can't call them Khalistanis, Naxals, Maoists, terrorists. It's preposterous.
I'm neutral on such issues, but the fact is such elements did infiltrate, the protests, because predominantly they were originating in Punjab, and there is a certain section that did sympathize with Khalistan. So that's, to paint all farmers would be wrong. But
that's my point.
Very accurate. There were certain elements that were pro-Khalistan. That I think that's a fact. Second is, on farm bills, my point of view is that they are progressive. I've studied them. Only thing is that maybe they should have done in a phased manner. There are lots of unexplained things, like now the Prime Minister and the Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Tomar, has come out and said that they're not doing away with MSP. That stays, but there's also an option to go to another source of, purchase. So you're not restricted to sell it in that mandi. But when the bills were brought in, these were not clarified, right? So clearly it is, any change is met with a kind of
a resistance, yeah.
But yes, it's a radical change, and it needed to be debated. Everybody needed to be taken on board. And the only thing I'd say in India, you can't get everybody on board, because there are vested interests, so on and so forth. So clearly, the truth is somewhere in the middle, and I am hoping that at some stage we will reach that middle. It'll only happen through communication, through dialogue, and engaging with each other. For farmers are very important for our GDP. They're also a very big, part of our population. So coming back to your book, now there are 6 chapters. You talked about Narendra Modi as the one horse race. You call him a horse. Thank God you didn't call him a one-trick pony, because he clearly isn't. He's shown that he can win elections again and again. But give us a sense of what's in this chapter.
Well, I think I have considered that Mr. Modi has captured the public imagination of India. As a critique of his politics and ideology, I've always felt that Mr. Modi has, kind of many issues on which he needs to address, his own persona, especially with regards to his views on the minorities. But I do feel that, his ability to connect with the people of India remains as strong as ever. For example, I think he took full advantage of the fact, that when the Congress was in UPA 1, Dr. Manmohan Singh or Rahul Gandhi or Mrs. Sonia Gandhi were not really engaging directly with the people of India. There was no real communication, interviews, whether television or print, or really, having a direct dialogue with the people of India. Campaigning during elections, that's what everybody does anyway. And I think Mr. Modi realized that the Congress was very hamstrung by its own internal inadequacy here. And he filled in that vacuum by talking all over the place. He went to colleges, he went to business chambers, His campaigning was extremely aggressive. He attacked the Gandhi family very directly. And I think he changed the narrative because he realized the Gandhis were just not in a position to fill the vacuum. And people in India like a leader who talks to them. Now, it's a big irony, Anurag. After 2009, Dr. Singh's silence was seen as an asset, that he was a man who was so focused on his work that he had no time for rhetoric and hyperbole. But after 2014, when social media actually ballooned, television became even bigger, and Mr. Modi was all over the place with his, absolutely aggressive, bombastic speeches. The communists looked extremely weak by comparison. And I maintained throughout that chapter that Mr. Modi has leveraged this remarkably well. I also need to give him credit here that he's a big risk taker. He gambles big. Demonetization was a big gamble. It bombed in the long run, but it gave him a short-term political gain in Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand elections that the BJP won. Although the BJP still says it was a success, I believe it was a monumental disaster. But Mr. Modi's ability to take the big dramatic steps. Now, he wants to tell the people of India that I am your protector, that you're safe under my guardianship, and therefore I will go to any extent to protect you. This is the kind of imagery that people like to see in a leader. Now, the lockdown, for example, was very hastily implemented. We were all given a 4-hour notice. But you look at the election results in Bihar, or for that matter in Andhra or even in Kerala, and people don't seem to be blaming him at all. They seem to be attacking the local chief ministers. But people say, Mr. Modi's intentions were a good one. Although anybody who understands policy will tell you that it was a very myopic decision, the lockdown in a 4-hour notice, and it destroyed the lives of many people who were ordinary, poor migrants who walked hundreds of miles back to Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Jharkhand. And those were tragic sights. I thought it was a humanitarian crisis. But Narendra Modi could overcome that as well.
Sanjay, just to, in hindsight, everything looks, we should have considered that, we should have taken it in. But the fact is, we were dealing with something for the first time. I don't think anybody factored in whether it was state governments or the central government, whether ruled by the Congress or ruled by the BJP. Of course, the BJP ruled states are much more than the Congress ruled states. Clearly, nobody kind of factored the plight of the migrant laborers or what could happen to them. So, if I had to give you counter argument, 4 weeks back in the US, just after the announcement of the election of Joe Biden as the president designate, there were food riots in the US, in the world's most advanced country where GDP is the highest in the world. There were food riots. There have been no food riots in the country. He's made sure he sent free ration to everyone. So, again, you may say that's insignificant, but the fact is that the social and tensions were lesser. There were no riots around food or basic things. I understand there was a loss of livelihood. And again, the government is never perfect. It can be close to perfect, but that's my view. But go on.
But Anurag, just kind of give you a point there. But there were people who died in India. There were people who died in trains who were returning back home. I don't think in America you saw those scenes. People didn't die. I mean, riots as in what? I mean, the fact of the matter is, yes, India is food grain surplus, which is why the question came up at the very beginning, that there should have been nobody who should have died, because please remember this, that we got 22% of the people living below the poverty line, which means less than $2 per day. And in India, we don't capture the suffering the way, it actually is at the ground level. So I agree with you that this is a valid point. In fact, I defended the government in the initial stages when I was still part of the Congress, saying, listen, this is a unique event. This is a catastrophe. This is a pandemic of, epic proportions. No political party or government in the world anticipated it. You saw what happened to Italy, UK, France, advanced Western economies, and then, of course, the United States of America, which is still in doldrums. Now, I agree with that completely. There's no debate on that. Having said that, the question is that the government had to understand that in 4 hours' notice, if you're going to leave people jobless, not knowing where they're going to get their income from, and they're not living in the state where they belong to, what are they going to do? And this data is like a regular economic data which should be known to all policymakers. So I don't completely buy that, but I do give this concession that yes, I mean, to some extent, the government probably did not read into it. But instead of trying to bulldoze or railroad through it, I would say a degree of introspection here for the government would do well in the future.
Okay. Now this takes me to the chapter number 4, which is about economy. You say it's been a season of blunders. We're 35 days away from the budget. What do you think the government should do? And why do you think the government, you call it the season of blunders?
Well, I think the season of blunders were only because of a couple of reasons. One is that, the economy basically survived those 5 years under Mr. Modi for just one reason, that India was a beneficiary of absolutely, oil prices that were scraping the bottom of the barrel. Oil prices collapsed, and that gives you a massive current account gains in terms of foreign exchange savings that you have. It gives your fiscal deficit a lot of headspace, and therefore you are able to actually have sizable revenues, that basically cash that you save, that you can deploy into capital asset creation. And I believe the government did not do enough. I mean, they in fact taxed the people, collected sizable revenue, and did not do the mark-to-market transparent mechanism of pricing on oil. And despite having a buffer, and I put it down in the book, of roughly 16 lakh crores, they were not able to create the kind of economic stimulus that was required to take India to a very higher level of GDP. Now think about it, Anurag, you are a seasoned, kind of an editor. Indian economy under Mr. Modi floundered right away after 2015. You have been on a continuous slump thereafter. And look at the situation today. I mean, today we are gloating that the GDP has not gone to -10, it has been -7.5. Now, we have a choice to basically say that, listen, I'm bleeding, but I'm not bleeding from my finger. Now that doesn't really answer the question. The fact is that India had begun to struggle long before the pandemic. You had no jobs. The informal sector stood devastated after demonetization. You had the SME balance sheets that turned completely bankrupt. And the government had to see these things a lot earlier. The GST came 6 months after demon. The demon was still wrecking the economy in every sense of the word. And it was hastily implemented. No trial and error was done. Maybe GST has settled today, but I think that became a double whammy, and in a great number of ways manifested the government's inability on governance. My third point, I have actually praised this in the book, Anurag, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. It's a very good act, and I do believe that along with handling NPAs, it could have been a great turning point, because you need a strong banking system to fund industry. Now look at the reality. The reality is that even Urjit Patel agreed that a good law like the IBC ended up being sloppily administered, because the government began intervening and saying, don't go too hard here, and try and make some exceptions here. So the IBC itself became a lot more frail in its execution. And I would say the government is fully responsible that despite having an NPA of 2.5 lakh crores in 2014, and they had an opportunity to use Raghuram Rajan's efforts to try and stop the twin balance sheet problem, it did not really do it. All it did was to blame Dr. Manmohan Singh's government, which was like bad economics. How much of legacy argument can you make? So NPAs remained bad, jobs went completely out of the window, farmers were protesting even then, the rural economy floundered, agricultural growth was virtually 1% in the first 3 years. The only thing that did well was to a great extent was foreign exchange reserves.
Sanjay, so
but we struggled.
We are 35 days before the budget. And the finance minister said this budget would be a budget like never before. So what are your expectations from the budget?
Well, I would say the most important thing would be to try and boost demand. Because who is going to make an investment in their capital assets or in expanding their business or acquiring new businesses when they find that they already have around only 70 to 75% capacity utilization? What are you going to do? I mean, or you have tons of inventory. So you need demand to really pick up. That's going to be, to my mind, the key
You're
focus.
talking about massive public spending.
Massive. See, I'll tell you what. I mean, if you look at the numbers, the public or the government expenditure has not really kept pace with what it should have. Now,
I'll take the contrarian view. In the last few months, the government may not have wanted a lot of sectors to have demand. Till the vaccine comes in and COVID is under control, it may not want to spur a lot of sectors. So it may be holding back for it to be done post-Jan, post-Feb, when there is a vaccine and the distribution is well under it.
Growth happening, FMCG, durables, let it happen. I mean, auto is a big, kind of bellwether about where the economy is going to go. I definitely feel that what the government should do right now, this should be its priority. That you're right, that if the pandemic continues, even if the cases are lower, it's not going to create the normal economic activity that we had before March 2020. So what the government needs to do, and I think we are delaying it to some extent, they should not only have their vaccines approved, that they should give license to for emergency authorization. The government should have a very robust plan to try and see if they can vaccinate as many people as possible, because India already has an advantage of a herd immunity today. Now, therefore, the number of people to be vaccinated may not be exactly all the 130 crore people don't need it. Now, if you hear Adar Poonawala's statement, Anurag, he said the government will require around 85,000 crore of rupees to vaccinate the people if they do it on a free of charge basis. Now, what is 85,000 crores for the government? It's nothing at all, because this is less than 0.5% of India's GDP. And we gave 1.45 lakh crores as tax concessions to the corporate sector last year, right? Here you're talking about saving lives. You're talking about the health of the country. So if the government were to announce today...
You might as well see the government doing it free. That's a possibility. It's not off the table. There is an expectation among certain quarters that the Prime Minister will make that announcement sometime soon, maybe early January, so on and so forth. So that is not a option that is off the table. I don't think you can say the government is not going to do it. I think that's actively being considered.
Well, Anurag, my point is that if the government were to make an announcement of these as soon as possible, two things happen. Number one, people know that they can get back to regular business activity without any fears of infection and hospitalization, death, and so on and so forth. See, there's nothing worse in the human mind than fear. And we need to try and remove that as soon as possible. And this is the state's responsibility. I also feel the government should engage with the corporate sector and use them as part of the entire distribution outreach on vaccination. These are going to be very, very vital. The moment the vaccines are out in the private market, trust me, the confidence will go to another level. But coming back to your question, to increase demand is the key. Provide more, shall we say, obviously Manrega should be a lot more of it should happen, but provide cash in hand. There should be an unemployment allowance given to many people who are between jobs until they get a new one. Give incentives to the corporate sector for hiring people. There can be all kinds of breaks that can be worked around that, but encourage hiring and don't put, even if it's gig economy hiring, it's okay, because you're not going to get full-time hires. You are going to have a lot of contract hiring. It doesn't matter as long as people are getting income. And obviously the government will have to put money in infrastructure projects because that has a multiplier effect. It works like a force multiplier. And more importantly, you've got to get the farm sector growing, because remember one thing, that we tend to forget that whenever your economy is done well, you need a very strong, sustainable agricultural sector, because that provides a lot of raw materials that you need to grow your industry. So I do believe that it's very important to look at the SMEs, look at small companies, look at medium-sized companies, because they're the job creators, look at agriculture, and definitely provide as much of money in hand that you can to people who can push up demand. If rural demand doesn't go up, remember, it's going to hurt big industry. You see, a lot of people think that they're they're decoupled. They're not decoupled. A lot of companies have struggled in 2020 because there's been no demand.
Thank you so much. So let me come to the Congress. The chapter on the Congress is called Time for Renewal. I think the time has been long overdue. Do you really see a renewal soon? And if yes, for the democracy to do well, how does one get Congress to be renewed?
Well, good question. I think there's a saying that is darker grows the night amidst a brighter ray. And I remember I am somewhere down the line an incorrigible optimist, Anurag. I do believe that the Congress party has probably seen a horrible period since 2015. It's lost many elections. It lost 2 Lok Sabha elections, and it's been routed in both of them. And the worry that I have is that the Congress has taken too long to bounce back, which is why, you're right. Your skepticism about a Congress comeback is totally justified. And therefore, I believe that the Congress has to get its act together. I have written that in detail in my book. And one of the things I mentioned that, we need to sort out our leadership problem at the earliest.
Okay, and continuing in the same way, there has been noise over the last 1 week that Priyanka Gandhi may be the next president of Congress. Do you see that as possibility? And do you see that if she comes in, can she revive Congress fortunes?
See, the Congress has a very strong base presence. It's there all over the country. Remember, this is a party that has had 404 seats in parliament. It has won many elections, over 350 seats. It still is the second largest national party. It still has 20% of the vote share, right? Which is why people like us were very upset with the Congress and we criticized our own party, because we said, what are you doing? You still have a lot of formidable strengths. You still have a very impressive library. And, to sit back and be laid back is not happening.
Kab jagega?
Yeah, exactly. I called it Rip Van Winkle. And, I do believe, Anurag, that the Congress party must make every day count. Now, to answer your question on Priyanka Gandhi Vadra, I've written about her in my book as well. She's sharp, she's charismatic, she's a good communicator, she's very, very effective with people. And I think she's got some deep insight in terms of political instincts. Now, it has to be tested though. I mean, there are a lot of people who are saying that, end of day in UP, she hasn't been able to make any difference at all. And they are probably right. But, end of day, don't forget that she is pretty much new to active politics, organizational politics. And Uttar Pradesh, let's admit it, is like a snake pit. So ultimately, in my opinion, for the Congress party, if it's going to be Priyanka Gandhi Vadra, well, we'll have to still live with that dynasty acquisition. People will say, well, just moves within the family. So I would say it would not be a bad idea for the Congress to move completely away from the Gandhi family. I do think the Gandhis will agree with it because they also want the party to do well. Give somebody else a chance, whoever it is. And I'm sure the Congress party will be able to make a comeback. And of course, the Gandhis are political assets.
Mr. Jha, who would that be? Give me your top 3 candidates. I'm giving a lot of the leeway by saying top 3, so you don't have to give just one name. So give me your top 3 candidates. If the Congress president, Sonia Gandhi, she's the working president right now, right?
Interim president, yeah.
Interim president, that's the right. If she had to ask you, what would be your 3 suggestions?
Well,
I'm not going to get you into trouble.
Anurag, you're not giving me leeway. You are actually, literally trying to hang me from a tall tree by a thin thread. That's the smart cookie. I always knew you since then that Mr. Batra had the ultimate charming personification. You are somebody who will send someone to hell and make him take the shortest route possible there. Okay, let me answer you though, that there are many contenders within G23 and outside of G23 as well. But, I remember, and I've said it before and I'll say it again on your program, that until Jyotiraditya was there, the 3 names that I used to hear most often was Jyotiraditya, Sachin Pilot, Shashi Tharoor. Now Jyotiraditya has left. Thank God Sachin is still there with us. I would feel Sachin is an excellent candidate. He's young, he's bright, ambitious, hardworking, and he understands politics. He's a great campaigner. I can vouch for it. Shashi is a good guy. A lot of people feel Shashi brings a different kind of vibe to politics with his intellectual depth, his command over Farrago and abstruse English language, and the fact that he's also worked on his Hindi and Urdu of late. Let me tell you, so Shashi can also cut the ice. Then you have other veterans in the party, people like Mukul Wasnik. He's another smart guy. I mean, not many people know, but he's a seasoned campaigner, was won several Lok Sabha elections from a young age, and he could be a dark horse in the game. And then you could have others. I mean, I'm not ruling out anybody. And Manish Tiwari may have an ambition to kind of become the.
What if I were to say, why not somebody like Ashok Gehlot? He's been a good administrator.
Could be Mr. Gehlot. Yeah. Could be.
Speaking, down to earth, knows politics inside out. and is deeply wedded to the Congress.
Yeah.
So, and I notice you still say us. You talk of Congress as it is still in the Congress. Is there a possibility for Sanjay Jha to leave the Congress? I mean, I know you've been suspended, but in your own thinking, leave the Congress. It seems like one-sided love right now. At least the parents of the bride have kind of pushed you away. Looks like. But would you consider joining another party? I know that Ms. Priyanka Chaturvedi left the Congress. She joined the Shiv Sena. She's now a Rajya Sabha MP at a very young age. There are other people who left the party and joined other parties and are having a good career. Of course, in Bengal, right from Trinamool Congress to the Congress, people are lining up for the BJP. So do we see Sanjay Jha joining any other political party? And would you consider joining the BJP?
Well, Anurag, let me finish the first part, and I will definitely bite the bullet on your second part of your question. I do believe Mr. Gehlot could also be one of the contenders. There's Mr. Kapil Sibal. There's a lot of good people in the party. I mean, Mr. Kamal Nath might want to become the Congress president. Mr. Anand Sharma may want to become. So I think there is no dearth of leadership. You give anybody a chance, anything can happen. But to answer your question,
acceptability is the key. Acceptability to all, acceptability to the family, and acceptability to the people. Because all said and done, Rahul Gandhi's had 2 tries and he has failed. For some reason, he has failed to get the imagination of the people going. So you'll have to have alternates. Go on.
Yeah, I don't blame Rahul for the 2014 defeat. He was far too new at that stage, and he was battling for the UPA, which had its own baggage it was carrying. But 2019, I do believe he took a good moral decision to quit. I think that's the kind of leadership that India needs. But coming back to your question, I do feel that I may have been suspended by the Congress. I have not been expelled yet, so I'm using the word us. My second point is that the Congress can suspend me from the organization, the political entity, but I am an ideological soldier of the Congress party. The Congress party cannot say that the ideology cannot be taken by the man on the street. I am very proud to say that unlike many people in the Congress who are not suspended, by the way, I am truly liberal. I'm a tolerant guy. We are secular people. We believe in the Gandhi-Nehru ideology. I walk it. I talk it. And I do think that that's something that nobody can take away from me. As far as joining other parties are concerned, well, there are people who obviously thought that I was a very disgruntled, disaffected, and a guy was very pissed with the Congress, and that I would now just kind of move off in a huff and, kind of do a press conference and rubbish Rahul Gandhi and, kind of tarnish the Congress. I have no such intention. If you read my book, a lot of people in the Congress have very stupidly believed that Sanjay has written a telltale, book where he's gone and hammered the Gandhi family, or he's gone ahead and screwed everybody in the Congress who was, kind of trying to beat down his neck. If you read my book, there's none of that. There's none of that. I have actually given constructive feedback to the Congress. I have written incidents where we behaved very dilettantish, very amateurish, very stupidly. A party that does not even talk to its own people. In today's day and age of modern technology, you have no excuse not to talk to your people all over the country. You can't be sitting in Delhi and running India, that's for sure. And therefore, I want to answer your question. I'm not joining the BJP now or ever. I don't think I'm joining any party at any point of time. And just to add, if it makes any difference,
Christmas party
it's not for
Christmas party tonight.
So where is the party tonight?
Yes, I'm sure you can join the Christmas party tonight.
Well, if you see my Twitter account, I just put on the fact that I became a Christmas tree yesterday. And I do believe there's a party tonight, but the fact of the matter is, at home, virtual, but I do want to make this point, Anurag, that there are people who sought me out. There are people who had conversations with me. And I have that conversation only to understand what the other side feels. I want to know how India's political ecosystem behaves. But I want to let you know that I was born a congressman the moment I began to read Gandhi and Nehru's books. And there is no way that I'm going to walk away from the ideology today, tomorrow, or ever.
Okay. My last 2 questions. One, in the Congress, 2 of the stalwarts of the Congress, if I may use the term pillars, it won't be misplaced. We lost them in the last few months. I'm talking of Mr. Ahmed Patel and I'm talking of Mr. Motilal Vora, right? Now, you see they're going, will let new blood come in. I know Mr. Pawan Kumar Bansal has been appointed as new treasurer, so on. But do you see younger generation now coming in? Does it provide an opportunity for newer leaders to kind of take in their place, if I may use that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the Congress is become a little fossilized. But first, the tragic death of Mr. Ahmed Patel, Ahmed Bhai to most of us, on account of COVID. I mean, that's a monumental loss for the party. And he was very close to the Gandhi family too. But, a fantastic troubleshooter. A big loss. Can you fill that gap? In my opinion, no. Mr. Vohra, again, a titan. I mean, for years managing the treasury and, again, being a guiding light given his political experience. But, you don't need these tragic incidents to happen to begin to try and change the party's, demographics. There are too many good people in the party. One of them is my friend Milind Devra, for example. I believe Milind is one of the most underestimated leaders in the Congress party. He makes very dispassionate statements. He has a good sense of business. He's a good communicator. We don't leverage him. Are we leveraging Sachin? Are we leveraging Manish? We are not. So I do feel the time, Dipender Hooda, excellent talent. Now we need to get a lot of these youngsters into play. Jitin Prasad, for example. So there is a lot of good people out there. We need to know how to get them into the central mainstream. The Congress, Anurag, I want to let you know why I'm bullish on the Congress. And I'm going to tell every one of your viewers, don't write off the Congress party. Anyone who writes off the Congress does so at their own peril. This is a party, if it gets a good, passionate, hungry leadership, if it gets a leader who's like relentlessly working 24/7, kind of strengthening the organization, getting good alliances, and most importantly, galvanizing the cadre, motivating our own people, the Congress can come back.
Okay. My last question.
Sure.
You and me met more than almost 21 years back.
Yeah.
My breakfast with you at the Gymkhana.
I remember.
The CCI, the
Yeah.
Cricket of India.
Yeah.
And I hope I can do that soon with you. But, we both have come from media in some way. Right?
Yeah.
You have a commentary on media, and clearly the chapter is not called The India of Today, but it's called The Republic of Hate. Right? I have not been able to figure out the title or what's in the chapter. But jokes apart, what do you think the media can do better? How would you rate the performance of Indian media, especially news media, in terms of being a guiding light for the government, in the sense of putting pressure on the government for the right things? Do you think the media is doing its job well?
Anurag, good you asked me this question. I have always been a big cheerleader for Indian media, which is why I have been very disappointed. There are large sections, I'm not saying everybody, by the way, large sections of mainstream India did not have to become the government cheerleaders. I mean, people are so apprehensive about questioning the government that to my mind is ridiculous. I believe in just one thing, that the job of media, business, print, social media, television particularly because it has a humongous impact, is to fight for the common man. If you're fighting for the common man every day, you're home and dry. But if you're going to indulge in this propaganda that somebody criticizes the government as an urban Naxal, anti-national, Maoist, I mean, come on, yeah. I mean, I don't know how people even had debates on the Congress being pro-Pakistan. It's stupid. I mean, for God's sake, don't you know your Indian history? Can any political party in this country be pro-Pakistan against his own country? I think that debate, to my mind, is so puerile and pathetic that we need to change that.
There must be some bright spots.
There are bright spots. That's what I'm going to tell you. I have actually said so publicly that I'm very upset that Rahul Gandhi is making a terrible mistake by calling the entire media Godi media. They're not. There are brave journalists, there are independent journalists in mainstream media, in television, in print. I think somebody like you, by the way, and I need to compliment you on the face of it, you do a fine balancing act, but I know your heart is in the right place because you are a believer in the constitution of this country. You will question the BJP, you will question the Congress too. Then I do think there is a need for very fearless conversations in this country. I find it unacceptable, Anurag, that supposing I'm a politician today, I come begging to you votes, you give it to me. Then I become a leader and then I scare you that you can't question me because I'll come after you with an FIR case. or with a defamation or an IT raid or a CBI raid. I mean, that's not acceptable. So my chapter on institutions is something that I hope readers will read in detail, because I believe the biggest threat to Indian democracy is if your institutions collapse, whether it's investigation, whether it's prosecution, whether it's governance, or whether it's a judiciary or the media. That's about it.
Okay. We wish you luck, Sanjay Jha, and we look forward to talking to you soon again in 2021. This is your third book. We look forward to your fourth book, and we wish you luck in your endeavor. And I'm sure the book will be a bestseller. For those of you who missed this session, you can watch the whole proceedings on the YouTube channel of Business World, or read the transcript on Monday on businessworld.insight, or read it in the next issue of Business World magazine. This is the book that Sanjay Jha has written. It is the third book, and it's called The Great Unraveling, India After 2014. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anurag. Thank you.
Sanjay, and we wish you luck. Thank you.
Thank you, buddy. Take care. Bye.